ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. Namaste, my dear friends. This is video number 9 on Panchadasi of Swami Vidyarnaya-Bharti. Chapter number 7. Elucidation of contentment. Tripti Deepa Parkarna. Panchadasi is a most important book on Advaita Vedanta by Swami Vidyarnaya-Bharti. The Tripti Deepa is devoted to a description of calm contentment and supreme satisfaction that are consequent upon Brahma knowledge. In its march from ignorance to enlightenment, the self is to pass through 7 stages. The 7th and the final stage is the state of release, where there is the supreme felicity, the peace of eternity. The present chapter gives us a glowing account of the final state of felicity as also of the steps that lead thereto. It is in the form of a commentary on the scriptural text which declares, if the Purusha knows the self as this am I, then desiring what and for whose desire fit should it suffer along with the body. The import of this scriptural passage is in the present chapter clearly explained, thereby it becomes patent how the one who is released in embodiment enjoys the state of satisfaction. Part 1 of Chapter 7, Nature of Creation. As an introduction to the explanation of what the word Purusha stands for, an account of the nature of creation is given. Creation, according to Advaita, is illusory manifestation. It is neither real transformation nor production de novo. Maya is the price of creation. It shows forth illusorily the Jiva and the Lord as mere appearances. The Jiva and the Lord are superimpositions, and by them are all other things superimposed. Scripture declares Prakriti creates the Jiva and the Lord as reflections. It becomes both Maya and Niscience. Both the Jiva and the Lord are non-real manifestations. They are the products of Maya, and in their turn they produce the entire universe. The macrocosmic universe, which begins with the thought of the Lord and ends with his entry in the form of the Jiva, is the product of the Lord. Scripture declares it thought, let me become many, and then the self having entered in the form of the Jiva, etc. The cosmos has its origination in the Lord's contemplation and finds its completion in the production of Jivahood of the entire external world of animate and inanimate objects. The Lord is the artificer. of the internal world of transmigratory existence, which begins in the state of waking and ends in release. The Jiva is the author. The Jiva is the progenitor of its own microcosmic world. That Jiva being deluded by Maya and depending on the body creates everything. In waking, it alone finds satisfaction in the manifold objects of enjoyment like woman, food, drink, etc. In the state of waking, the jiva delights itself with external objects. Even in dream, which is the world produced by its own maya, the jiva is the enjoyer of pleasure and pain. If in waking the jiva sports with the external world, in dream the sphere of its ravings is the internal world of fiction and fancy. During the time of sleep, when everything is dissolved, it obtains happiness pressed by tamas. And again, due to conjunction with the deeds of the past birth, the same jiva dreams and wakes. The jiva who sports in these three spheres of it indeed is the entire manifold born. The jiva is tossed from one birth to another, from one state to another, like the weaver's shuttle without cessation. It lives in the cocoon of its own making. From death to death, it travels by the force of its delusion. But when it frees itself from the shackles of ignorance, it is no more taunted by transmigration. There is no longer any misery for it. That which shines in the world of waking, dream, sleep, etc., that Brahma I am, knowing thus he is released from all bondage. Release which is brought about by knowledge is the end of transmigration, of the transmigratory life which begins in waking and comes to a close in release. The Jiva is the agent. It forgets its own bonds and finally frees itself from its own fetters. Number two, Purusha. Having described the nature of creation, the meaning of the word Purusha is explained. The self of the nature of immutable, non attached intelligence is the locus of delusion. The same self as reflected in the intellect owing to reciprocal superimposition is spoken of in the Shruti as the Purusha. The bare jiva is not meant by the word Purusha. The jiva as based on the self alone is eligible for release, etc. In fact, no delusion is experienced without a locus thereof. When the jiva, as conjoined with the locus element, takes hold of the delusion element, it begins to have the conceit I am the subject of transmigration. It, with the locus element takes hold of the delusion element, it begins to have the conceit I am the subject of transmigration. The presentation of illusory silver is dependent on the sub substrateness of nacre. Only in conjunction with the This element of nacre is the delusion element of silver presented. But when the delusion element is discarded, when the substrate becomes the principal factor of experience, then there is the realization I am the non attached intelligence self. It may be objected that as the non attached self is not the object of the cognition I, it does not stand to reason to use the word I in respect of it. This objection is not sound. The word I has three senses. One of them is the principal and the other two are secondary. The principal usage of the word I is with regard to the combined form of the immutable self and the reflection of intelligence. Due to reciprocal superimposition, the vulgar identity, the immutable with the reflection, and designate this combined form as I. But those who know the truth discriminate between the permanent self and the perishing reflection. When they talk in terms of scripture, they use the word I in respect of the former, and in empirical usage, they designate the letter as I. Though the same concept is used for both of them, they do not confound the two. When in empirical uses the enlightened say I go, etc., what they mean by concept I is the reflection of intelligence as distinct from the immutable self. But from the point of view of scripture, they use the concept I in I am non attached, I am the intelligence self, etc., only in respect of the bare immutable self. The, the denotation of I through secondary implication is the eternal self. It may be said that since knowledge as well as ignorance belong only to the reflection of intelligence and not to the self, it cannot be asserted of the self that it knows as I am the immutable, and that it is ridiculous to say that the knowledge I am the immutable belongs to the reflection of intelligence, for the reflection is not the prototype, the shadow is not the substance. This objection is not sound. There is no reality for the reflection apart from that of the prototype. The reflection of intelligence is of the nature of the immutable alone. Since its being a reflection is only apparent, its immutability alone remains as the eternal reality. According to Abhasavada, the locus of the reflection of intelligence is the immutable intelligence defined by the internal organ. The reflection which is superimposed is not different from the substrate of superimposition. When the reflexness of the reflection is sublated, the immutable alone remains. Between Brahma and the immutable, there is opposition in the principal stand, and between the immutable and the reflection of intelligence, there is opposition through sublation. If it be if it be said that even the cognition I am the immutable is illusory, since it belongs to the illusory reflection of intelligence, it is a contingence of the acceptable. When it is known that the rope snake is unreal, the reality of its movement is nowhere admitted. If the snake be a fiction, then its movement must also be a fiction and not a fact. When it is declared of the reflection of intelligence that it is illusory, its knowledge must also be illusory. Indeed, one cannot eat the cake and keep it too. It is no doubt true that even the cognition, I am the immutable, is illusory. But this knowledge is quite efficient to remove transmigration and its attendant misery. Both the establisher and the sublater must belong to the same genus as their object. The dream appetite can be satiated only by the dream food. No amount of real food can satisfy the hunger felt in the dream. Similarly, empirically felt needs can be satisfied only by the empirical remedies, not otherwise. There is a saying in the world, offer oblation to suit the yaksa. As is the ailment, so should be the remedy be. An illusory disease can be removed by an illusory antidote. Dream is destroyed by the dream created tiger. In the same way, knowledge through illusory, though illusory, is capable of destroying ignorance and its consequent misery of transmigratory existence. There is no discrepancy whatever in the Purusha which is related to the immutable, discriminating itself from the immutable and cognizing as I am the immutable. This is the truth taught in the scriptural passage by the word Asmi, I am. Third part of chapter number 7, 7 stages. The scriptural texts speak of the self as this because the self is to be immediately experienced. Just as we have clear perception of the body as I am a Brahma, etc., we should have cognition more immediate than the immediacy of perception of the self as I am the immutable self, etc. Sankara in the Upadesha Sahasri says, he for whom there is like the cognition of the body, knowledge of the self, which is the sublater of the body, cognition is released even without his will. If it be said that the word this indicates the natural immediacy of the self, let it be so. Since the self is the self-luminous intelligence, it is ever immediate. The immediacy and self-luminosity of the self do not really conflict with our ignorance of it. Mediacy and immediacy, knowledge and ignorance, both of them are intelligible in respect of the self. Once 10 companions, after crossing a swollen river, counted themselves. The man who counted without reckoning himself counted only 9. Though his person was most immediate in existence to him, nay, identical in existence with him, he did not know that he was the 10th. A passerby who happened to observe the unnecessary commotion that prevailed among these comrades accosted them with the words, there is among you the 10th man. Then he addressed the man who counted and said, you are the 10th. The pilgrimage in ignorance is analogous to the trouble of these comrades. Though the self is most immediate and intimate, we are in thorough ignorance with regard to it. The statement "there is no self," very common among the ignorant, is comparable to the sobs and sighs of the man who counted and said, "There is not the tenth person, he is not to be seen." This is a product of ignorance. The learned call it the obscuration brought about by ignorance. The 10 travelers, not finding the tenth person, began to weep and shout, "The tenth man was drowned in the river," etc. Then the crying, etc. of these comrades are referred to by those who know as projection, a product of ignorance. The words of the passerby, "The tenth man is not dead, he is here," gave them immediate knowledge like the knowledge of heaven, etc. When the trustworthy person counted them and said, pointing to the man who had originally counted, "You are the tenth," then there was immediate cognition of himself, which put an end to the state of misery which they were in. There was mirth in the place of gloom, peals of laughter in the place of pain and misery. In the example given above, 7 stages are discernible: ignorance, obscuration, projection, mediate, knowledge, immediate experience, the removal of misery, and contentment. These 7 stages can be observed in the pilgrimage of the self. The reflection of intelligence with its mind attached to transmigration does not know the reality of its existence, namely the self luminous immutable. This is its ignorance of its own inner nature. This is the starting point of its progress to perfection. The reflection incidentally says there is not the immutable, it does not appear, and proceeds to assert, "I am the agent, I am the enjoyer." The former is due to obscuration and the latter is due to projection. The existence of the self is first obscured, and then qualities like agency and enjoyership, which are not inherent in the self, are superimposed on the self, either due to scriptural testimony or due to the grace of the perceptor. There is at first mediate knowledge in the form the immutable exists, and then through inquiry there results the immediate experience. I alone am the immutable. These two are the fourth and the fifth stages in the quest for truth. When there is the immediate experience of the true nature of the self, there is the relinquishment of the assemblies of misery and pain like agency and enjoyership, and there dawn supreme happiness and divine contentment, for what is to be done has been done, and what is to be attained has been attained. This is the twofold fruit of the of knowledge tree of knowledge, the removal of misery and the teachings of bliss. These then are the 7 stages: ignorance, obscuration, projection, mediate cognition, immediate experience, release from misery, and unexcellable bliss. These 7 are the states not of the self but of the reflection of intelligence, and in them are included both bondage and release. Of them, the first three, viz., ignorance, obscuration, and projection, are together the cause of bondage. Ignorance is that state of indifference which exists prior to enquiry in the form "I do not know." Non-knowledge is the cause of the empirical usage of indifference. Inquiry conducted on wrong data yields the conclusion the self does not exist, it does not appear. This empirical usage of what is contrary to truth is the product of obscuration, the form of the reflection of intelligence which possesses two bodies is called the projection. The host of misery like agency etc. called transmigration, which is the cause of bondage, is the product of projection of ignorance. Although both ignorance and obscuration are established prior to projection, they belong to projection alone and not to the self. Even prior to the actual production of projection, there is its impression. Hence, there is no contradiction in stating that ignorance and obscuration are the states of projection, that is, the reflection of intelligence. It cannot be objected that since ignorance etc. are superimposed on Brahma, they are the states of Brahma for all states, not only these are superimposed on Brahma alone. If it be said that the states subsequent to projection as expressed by the statements I am the transmigrating individual, I am enlightened, I am free from misery, I am contented, appear to be inherent in the Jiva and not in Brahma, then even the prior states of ignorance and obscuration, I am ignorant, the existence and presentation of Brahma are not seen by me, etc., appear certainly to be inherent in the Jiva. Equally with the other states, even ignorance and obscuration seem to be dependent on the Jiva. The perceptors have taught that Brahma is the abode of ignorance because it is the substrate of the latter. Ignorance is here declared to be the state of the jiva because of the conceit of the jiva in ignorance. The twofold knowledge, mediate and immediate, removes ignorance, and with the destruction of ignorance, perish its products, the two kinds of obscuration. It does not appear, it does not exist. By mediate knowledge is destroyed the cause of the obscuration of the existence of the self, and by immediate experience is removed the other obscuration, namely the non-appearance of the self. Since the superimposition of the jivahood is discarded with the destruction of obscuration, the entire transmigration misery, which is another name for it, consisting of agency, etc., is removed without a trace. When thus all misery is dispelled and the self nature of eternal freedom is revealed, and as there is not even the remotest possibility of the revival of misery, there is unexcellable bliss and unalloyed happiness. A discussion of the seven states had to be entered upon because the scriptural scriptural text which is being commented on in the present chapter purports to teach that immediate experience and removal of misery are dependent on the jiva. Part 4 of chapter 7, mediate and immediate knowledge. It was said that the significance of the word this is to indicate that the self is the content of immediate experience. The meaning of immediacy here is twofold. The self is said to be immediate because it is self-luminous. It is a content of immediate experience because it is cognized by a mode of the intellect. Immediacy in the sense of the self-luminosity of the self does not conflict with the immediate cognition of the self. The self does not cease to be self-luminous when it is immediately cognized, for even the immediate cognition is of the form that the self is self-luminous. When there is not the cognition, I am Brahma, but when there is the cognition, Brahma exists. It is called mediate knowledge. This mediate knowledge is not illusory because its sublation cannot be demonstrated. It can be sublated only by the evidence which says Brahma does not exist, but such evidence is nowhere found. Hence, it is wrong to maintain that mediate knowledge is illusory. If it be said that the mediate knowledge is illusory because it does not have the specific nature of Brahma for its content, then even the cognition of heaven, whose content is only the general form as heaven exists and not the specific form as this is heaven, must be illusory. Then it may be said that immediate knowledge is illusory because it has for its content Brahma, which is the content of immediate experience. This is not true. Even the mediate knowledge does not present Brahma to be mediate. The knowledge under discussion is said to be mediate because it does not give us direct intuitive experience of Brahma in the form this is Brahma. If it be said that mediate knowledge is illusory because it does not apprehend an element of its content, then even the cognition of pot, etc., must be illusory because the entire pot is never perceived. Though, unlike the pot, Brahma is without parts, it seems to be endowed with parts which are ultimately to be excluded. The elements or parts which are to be excluded are the element of non existence and the element of non appearance. The former is removed by mediate knowledge and the latter by immediate experience. That a content, though immediate, can be immediately known is well exemplified by the story of the 10 travelers. When the trustworthy person tells the travelers that there is the 10th man, he is not deluding them. Similarly, the statement Brahma exists is not erroneous. In both the cases, there is the obscuration of ignorance. A bare statement yields only immediate knowledge. But when the meaning of the statement is inquired into, the specific nature of the content becomes explicit with the result that there arises immediate experience. When the full purport of the sentence, the self is Brahma, is cognized after a thorough inquiry, Brahma becomes the content of immediate experience. In the example of the travelers, also, we find that there is the experience of the immediate presence of the 10th person only after an inquiry. When the trustworthy person is questioned as to who the 10th man is, he counts all the 10 and reveals to them the 10th man who was all the time there alone. The cognition which is thus obtained after inquiry is never destroyed. No longer could the travelers harbor the belief that one of them had perished in the floods. Similarly, in the case of Burma, there is at first the immediate knowledge of its existence from the scriptural statements like, "In the beginning this was Sat alone, one only without a second," etc. Then the major text like "that thou art," when their purport is clearly understood, reveal the immediacy of Brahma. Nevermore does this knowledge that the self is identical with Brahma attain inconstancy. Since the immediate since the immediacy of Brahma is well established, there is no fear of losing the intuitive experience of Brahma. That there is immediate knowledge from mere statement and immediate knowledge from the statement whose meaning has been inquired into is illustrated in the episode of Bhirgu of the Taittiriya Upanishad. Understanding Burma at first immediately through its characteristics of being the cause of origination, etc. Bhargu came to have immediate experience of Burma through a searching and prolonged inquiry. Though in this case Bhargu's parent did not instruct his son in the words that thou art, etc., he pointed out to him the field of inquiry, namely the five seats. Through repeated inquiry into the nature of the seeds, Bhargu came to realize that bliss is Brahma and that the self is identical with Brahma. After declaring reality, knowledge, and infinity to be the essential characteristics of Brahma, Scripture shows that the same infinite Brahma is to be known as lying in the cave of the sheaths. The episode of Indra in the Chandogya Upanishad is a similar instance in point. Indra, after knowing immediately the characteristics of the self as indicated in the passage, that self which is devoid of defect, rid of the ravaging effects of age, free from death and misery, etc., approached his preceptor 4 times with a view to acquire intuitive experience of the self. The Aitreya Upanishad indicates Brahma immediately in the passage "in the beginning this was the one only self, nothing else existed," etc., and later by the method of superimpositions and subsequent removal, the Upanishad imparts an intuitive experience of Brahma as being of the nature of intelligence. Immediate cognition of Brahma results from all the minor text of scripture. From the enquiry into the purport of the major text is derived the immediate experience of Brahma. This view is not without support from the preceptors and pioneers of Advaita. Sankara, in his Vakyavirti, states that the major texts are for the sake of the establishment of the immediate experience of Brahma. Hence, it is wrong to contend that the major texts do not yield immediate insight into the truth. Through inquiry into the purport of the major text, one realizes the identity between the self and Brahma. The intelligence defined by the internal organ which is the abode of the word and concept of I is indicated by the word thou in the major text. Isvara, who is defined by Maya, who is the source of the world, whose characteristics are omniscience, etc., who is conditioned by the quality of mediacy, and who is of the nature of a reality, etc., is indicated by the word that when we consider merely the expressed senses of the two words, we find that they contradict each other. To one and the same object, we would then have to attribute both immediacy and mediacy, finitude and infinitude. Hence, discarding the first meaning of the words, we must probe into their secondary implications. The kind of secondary implication which is applicable to major text like that thou art is that which is obtained by relinquishing a part of their prime primacy meaning. As in the case of the judgment, this is that person. In respect of the major text also, the inclusive non-inclusive implication is to be resorted to. In such cases as these, the express sense either of the related or of the qualified is not intelligible. The sense of the major text is declared by the learned to be the impartite reality, which is of the one consistency of intelligence. The inner intelligence, which shines as the witness of all intellects, is the self, which is inexcellable bliss. There is no other entity besides it. It is all that which is. When in this manner there is the cognition of the identity between the self and Brahma, then alone is removed the non-Brahmahood of the sense of thou, and as a consequence, the mediacy of the sense of that ceases. When the non-Brahmahood of thou and mediacy or remoteness of that are removed, there is gained the intuitive insight into the nature of the self, which is the fullness of the bliss, the sole reality which is without a second. Those who assert that there is only immediate knowledge from the major text do not really know the purport of scripture. They are quack doctors of philosophy, not real knowers of the truth. Setting aside the final doctrine of scripture, it may be argued that logic tells us that from a sentence only mediate cognition results. That, for example, from a statement about heaven, we get only an inferential knowledge about heaven. The argument takes the following syllogistic form. The major text gives only immediate knowledge because it is a sentence, like the sentence about heaven. This syllogism is not valid, for the Provence is inconstant in the case of the tenth man in the episode of the travelers. From the statement, you are the tenth man, there certainly results immediate knowledge. Hence, it is not established that because the major text is a sentence, it yields only immediate knowledge. It may be said that if the jiva, which is itself immediate, desires the immediacy of the Brahma, the established immediacy which is inherent in it may perish, but this fear is without any ground, because what the opponent regards as a defect is really a contingence of the acceptable. The individuality of Jiva is not desired to be maintained. On the contrary, it is the destruction of its individuality that is sought after. It may be said that the immediacy of the jiva is intelligible because the jiva is defined by an adjunct, but not that of Brahma because Brahma is devoid of adjuncts. This objection is not valid. That Brahma is devoid of adjunct is not established. The cognition of Brahma has for its content only that which is defined by Adjunct. Until there is final freedom from the shackles of the body, the adjuncts are not removed. The difference between the adjuncts respectively of the Jiva and of Brahma is this, that while the Jiva is conjoined with the intellect, Brahma is free from such conjunction. Conjunction with the intellect is the adjunct of the jiva, while non-conjunction with the intellect is the adjunct of Brahma. Now it may be asked, a positive fact like the conjunction with the intellect is certainly an adjunct, but how is a negation such as the non-conjunction with the intellect an adjunct? To this objection, the reply is, the definition of adjunct is this, that which is the cause of difference which exists so long as the product lasts is an adjunct. This definition applies equally to affirmation and the negation of the conjunction with intellect. As is affirmation, so is negation and adjunct. Gold is no doubt different from iron, but there is little difference between them when they become the fetters of a man. Conjunction as well as non-conjunction with the intellect are adjuncts in so far as both of them serve to differentiate the jiva from Brahma. That negation is not bare negation, that equally with positive assertion it is instrumental to Brahma knowledge is declared by all the perceptors of Advaita. The function of the Vedanta is twofold, that is, through the exclusion of not that, and through direct affirmation. The exclusion of the non-self is as essential as the positive assertion about the self. A contention may be raised here. If the Vedantas teach Brahma through excluding the universe, how could there be cognition through opposition in the form I am Brahma, since the sense of I which falls on the side of the non-self is also to be excluded? To this contention, the reply is, since only a part of the sense of I is relinquished, the statement I am Brahma is quite intelligible through exclusive, non-exclusive implication. By renouncing the internal organ, the intelligence witness self which remains is seen to be of the nature of Brahma. In the statement I am Brahma, by the word I is meant the self which is free from conjunction with the internal organ. So this video is completed. Please like, comment and share the video and subscribe the channel. Next video number 10 will start with part 5 of chapter 7 of Panchadasi, that is Brahma knowledge, pervasion by intellect. So thank you for watching this video.